The things I've been talking about over the last few weeks in this Enlightened Living series are like a collection of character qualities or practices within Buddhism which, if they are followed, each step leads to the next one, and there are a total of 38 steps. And what I've been doing is working through each step in 2 lectures, and where we are at the moment is the subject of respect. And last time I explained that respect is a little bit different from expressing respect. Soldiers might salute a senior officer. It doesn't mean they respect them, but they are expressing respect. Respect itself is more like the attitude you have, and it's said to be very useful as a means to accelerate your ability to learn, especially on spiritual topics. And I talked last time about the things which respect is not, which is like you don't respect people because you want their respect back. Same word, but a different purpose. But within the context of Buddhism, it's more to do with doing the opposite of finding fault with things. So if you come across something new, then respect would be the thing which gives you the potential to look for what you can learn about something which is new or unfamiliar to you. And there may be things which are right and wrong with people you come across, things you come across, situations you come across. But if you're a person who has respect, then your first inclination would be to try to look for things which are positive in whatever that is, and extract those parts for yourself and learn from them and better yourself as a result of them. So the opposite of finding fault with things. And within Buddhism itself, then there are particular things which are given respect in particular. So this is what I'm talking about today, is more the what of respect rather than the how or the why. Okay? And there's a list of 7 things which are found in several places in the Buddhist scriptures, which are held up as things which are of great potential benefit for those who are on a spiritual journey, which, if they can look for what is good in those things, then it will benefit them greatly. So some of these you may have heard of before, but may not know much detail about them, and maybe not know a great deal of detail about how you might respect those things in a way that would derive benefit for yourself. So the Buddha, who is a person, the Dharma, which is what he taught. Sangha means a community of those who have followed the teaching successfully. Education, which is a sort of phenomenon. Meditation, which we know a little bit more about. The principle of non-recklessness, which we've heard about over the last few weeks. And also the principle of hospitality. So 7 in all. And of course, they're very different in nature. You've got principles there, you've got people there, you've got ways of treating people, quite a mixture. So obviously using the word respect for all of those might have different ways of interpreting the word respect. So I'll start at the top of the list and talk about how Buddhists generally show respect or treat the Buddha with respect. And this differs depending on whether the Buddha is still alive or whether he has passed away. So the Buddha is still alive? Not really, no. He did pass on about 2,500 years ago. But when he was still alive, then the monks who were learning from him had particular ways in which they would treat the Buddha to show respect. And he had many qualities, of course, which you can learn about if you ever read in the chanting book translation. Things like being a wise person, having good conduct, having clearly understood the world, and being able to teach it to other people, for example. So when he was still alive, the monks would go to see him 3 times a day. That would be considered respectful. If it was lay people, then they would go when they could. Yeah? If the Buddha was not wearing shoes, then they would also not wear shoes. If the Buddha was in a lower place than them, then they would not go somewhere higher than he was. If he had not put up an umbrella, then they would also not put up an umbrella. These would all be considered ways of showing respect. And also for monks, there's particular customs to do with wearing a robe. You might notice that I've got one shoulder open. That's considered a humble way of wearing the robe. A less humble way would be covering both shoulders, which is how monks dress when they go outside the temple. Yeah? So if the Buddha had opened one shoulder, so humble, then all the other monks would not cover both shoulders. Yeah? They would adopt the same level of humility of dress. Yeah? So that would be how you would behave if the Buddha was still alive. However, we are in a time when the Buddha has already passed on, but we still wish to show respect to the Buddha, but the way that's done is a little bit different. So, hence the posthumously. So, often this refers to showing respect to pagodas, which are the sort of memorials in which the relics of the Buddha are enshrined. So they would be treated with respect. Or Buddha statues. Yeah? So, ways of paying respect to a pagoda would include things like going on a pilgrimage to what are known as the 4 holy sites of Buddhism. Have you heard of them? Can you tell me any of them? For example, where the Buddha was born, which is in modern-day Nepal, Lumbini Grove, where the Buddha was enlightened, which was in... Oh, well, that's a good start, yes. Bodh Gaya in India. So these are all pagodas of various sorts, you can see, marking the spot. Where he gave his first teaching, a place called Sarnath. And those are, so Nepal, Northeast India for the second 2, and then Central India, Kusinagar, where the Buddha eventually passed away for the last time. So visiting them with a heart full of faith would be a way of showing respect. Some Buddhists go on a pilgrimage. They even have quite luxury ones these days. So the reason they would want to do that is because there's a quote in the scriptures, in fact in the Digha Nikaya, which says that if anyone makes that pilgrimage to the 4 holy sites with faith in their hearts, then they would go to heaven at the end of their life. So, pretty good deal, right? So, splash out on a holiday to traipse around India, or they can do it in luxury these days with some of the Japanese ones where they have hotels conveniently positioned along the road. Yes, a good way of going to heaven for sure. Other ways of paying respect to the Buddha posthumously include paying respect to Buddha statues, often respect is paid by doing what's known as the 5-point bow, which is where people bow down with their head down to the ground from a kneeling position. It's called 5-point, not because you get 5 points for it, but because 5 parts of your body are touching the ground at the same time, 2 knees, 2 elbows, and 1 forehead. Yeah? Or just paying respect by putting one's hands in a gesture of prayer. Some places they actually wash the Buddha statue. This would take place sometimes at Thai New Year, for example, out of respect. Apart from that, respecting Buddhist shrines or temple buildings. Usually people would pay respect at the Buddha statue when they arrive at the temple or when they leave. First thing they do when they arrive, last thing before they leave. If they enter a temple or pagoda compound, they would remove their shoes out of respect, which you seem to have done. And also not putting up an umbrella in a pagoda ground. Also, one should keep one's composure during the time one is in the temple, not chattering or doing amateur dramatics in the temple buildings, yes. And monks within the temple would wear their robes in the same way, with the humble, just one shoulder open. So, Buddha, before he passed away, after he passed away. The Dharma is the teachings which the Buddha gave during his life. So obviously he would teach them vocally or whatever. Many years later these were written down as scriptures and passed from teacher to student over many generations. And these teachings are considered worthy of respect because they are timeless. They inspire people who learn about them to want to share them with other people. They are of that nature. They can be internalized, and they can be realized by those whose meditation is deep enough. Yeah? So they're in the scriptures, but in a sense you could rediscover them for yourself if your meditation is deep enough. Ways to pay respect to the Dhamma teachings are that you should take the opportunity to learn about them wherever possible. You should treat them with respect, especially if they're written down, and the books should be treated with respect as well. And not the sort of books you would want to make pen marks on. Also, you shouldn't make fun of the teachings, and if you have the opportunity to teach them, then you should try to teach it accurately. Yeah. The community of those who follow the teachings, known as the Sangha. Some places they include just the monks. Some places they include just the enlightened monks, and some places they just talk about it as the whole Buddhist community of those who practice. So it depends on how you want to define the Sangha. But generally it is the enlightened monks, ones who have sort of are good examples for us to follow. So in their presence, we should maintain composure. We shouldn't lie down in their presence, for example. We shouldn't put up umbrellas or put on our shoes in the middle of the monastic community. And we shouldn't get in the way. Sometimes a monk is walking along, people are like standing in the way or whatever, not really considered very respectful. Yeah. Not boasting about your knowledge of the Dharma in their presence. or answering questions on the Dharma unless the monk has invited you to do so. And looking after the needs of a monk and keeping an open house to the monks. So that's Buddha, Dharma, Sangha, often known as the Triple Gem, which we are fairly familiar with. But the Buddha went further and he said there's other things we need to be respectful towards, apart from these very obvious sort of objects of faith, you might call them. So, education, surprising? Respect for education? Well, if you want to learn something, you better have respect for education. It doesn't mean you bow to your textbooks, but it means that you should be sincere in your studies and not reckless. You shouldn't take the attitude that you already know it all, and you should try to study in a way that you get to the core of the subject that you're studying. Meditation is also considered worth respecting. Not just, oh, I respect meditation, but I don't actually do it. So it would be something that you would take seriously, practice regularly. It's the thing which links theory to attainment, so it's a very important connector in the whole process of Buddhist sort of practice. So how would one be respectful of meditation apart from practicing it, taking it seriously? It's interesting to think that even after the Buddha became enlightened, he still meditated every day. Surprising? Well, there's still more to know. Even if you're enlightened, there's still more to know. So meditation is obviously very important, even for those who are already enlightened. And for this reason, another thing which is worth remembering is that if you see someone else meditating, then you should have respect for them by not doing something that's going to disturb them from their meditation. So you should tiptoe quietly when you see other people meditating. And there's more. I said total of 7, number 6 and number 7. Non-recklessness, so not doing things which once you know the value of doing good things rather than sort of unscrupulous things in your life, then you ought to sort of keep yourself on the right side of the fence. And trying to keep your mind centered, whatever you're doing, both inside and outside the meditation, would be considered as non-recklessness. A little flag on the pagoda, if you remember, from the lecture we had a few weeks ago. And maybe the most surprising of all, respect for hospitality. So does that mean like meet and greet? Respect for guests, I suppose? Well, it's pretty big in all sorts of Buddhist culture. Sometimes I heard some really surprising stories about how well tourists are treated in Thailand. In fact, I never heard a bad word from any tourist who visited Thailand. Like, no matter how sort of gross they are, they all come back impressed from Thailand. And one story I heard was there's some sort of Westerner on the bus going in the wrong direction in Thailand. And a little old lady said, oh, like you're on the wrong bus and everything. She got off the bus with the guy giving up her own journey, got on the other bus going the opposite direction with him until he got to where he needed to be, and then got back on the bus again in order to continue her journey. It's like just incredible how much hospitality or respect for hospitality is sort of imbued in that culture. And you can bet it comes from Buddhism. Also, in this, you heard me talking about people being offered the bed in the house while all the people who live in the house go and sleep on the floor somewhere, not sort of being offered the couch in many Buddhist households who are putting other guests up. So it's really taken very seriously. But the reason for that is that a teacher in our tradition mentioned that if people have respect for hospitality, then it will lead them towards respect for non-recklessness. If they have respect for non-recklessness, then it will lead them to have respect for meditation. If they have respect for meditation, it will lead them to have respect for education. If they have respect for education, it will lead them to have respect for the Sangha. If they have respect for the Sangha, it will lead them to have respect for the Dharma. And if they have respect for the Dharma, then it will lead them to have respect for the Buddha. So they're all connected one way or another. Usually the last one on the list will lead to all the other ones being fulfilled. So this is the importance of hospitality beyond merely meet and greet, which would be considered as material hospitality or amissa patisantan, but also looking after people with the appropriate spiritual advice or help, which would be providing spiritual hospitality or Dhamma Patisantana. Also, there are some secular objects of respect. And some of these we've mentioned previously, especially if they're secular people who have respect for all the 7 things I already mentioned. But certainly national leaders, kings, monarchs, who are established in the 10 virtues of monarch, like being sort of good and just and ruling with compassion for their subjects. Parents, because of all the good they have done us in the past. Teachers, preceptors, elders, older brothers or sisters generally. We learned about this last time with the elephant and the partridge and the monkey. Respecting each other according to seniority. You might say it's artificial, but it leads people to have respect and learn from one another and cooperate with one another. And also respect for younger brothers or sisters as well, if they are of particular virtue. In places where respect for secular objects is appropriate, it might be by standing up, making way for a person who you respect, standing to receive that person, especially in schools. All the students stand up to greet the teacher in Asia. And holding hands in a gesture of respect, if that is appropriate, or shaking hands or whatever, bowing or referring to them by their proper name. And as I said, with respect, whatever you're talking about, situation, people, things, whether they're monastic, whether they are secular, really behind the attitude of respect is in people who are not quite perfect, looking to try to find what you can learn from nonetheless. What are the redeeming features of that person which you can learn from, maybe incorporate into your own personality or repertoire for yourself. And I've got 2 stories from the scriptures which are quite amusing. One to do with the right-hand disciple of the Buddha who was called Sariputta, and another disciple of the Buddha. Both were enlightened, so in theory they should have all the imperfections in their mind already got rid of by the fact they have become enlightened. But of course enlightenment doesn't work quite like that. Sometimes there are a few little habits that get through, usually fairly harmless peccadillos, which don't really make a difference one way or the other to a person's sort of ultimate enlightenment, but maybe still are in there somewhere. And with Sariputta, picture here, that's not him this lifetime, okay. Sometimes when he went on an alms round with a lot of other monks, so went out with an alms bowl collecting food, if there was a canal and there was a bridge to cross over the canal, sometimes he didn't bother using the bridge, but he would sort of leap over the canal, which is a bit strange. Yeah? Like, not very sort of dignified for a monk normally. Sometimes when he was on one of these Dhutanga walks or these sort of monastic pilgrimages, instead of camping on the ground like all the other monks did under the mosquito net, he would climb up into the treetops and sleep up in the branches. And everyone thought, oh, that's a bit strange. isn't he supposed to be like an exemplary monk and all that? So they asked the Buddha about this, and they said, we were wondering, like, if your main disciple, like right-hand disciple, Venerable Sariputta, is he really enlightened? He does have some rather strange behaviors, like jumping over canals, sleeping in treetops. Doesn't sound like the sort of person who ought to be enlightened. And the Buddha said, although Sariputta is enlightened, there are some deeply ingrained aspects of his character that enlightenment has not changed, because previously he was born for many lifetimes as a monkey. Yeah? And there's another similar thing happened to another enlightened monk whose name was Pilindhavaccha. And whenever he met someone, he would greet them with the words, "You peasant." The word vasala in Pali language. And if you didn't actually happen to be a peasant, and you got called a peasant every day, it might get rather irritating, even for the most patient people in the world. And even if they were aristocrats or they were even the king, then they weren't spared the peasant treatment from this monk. And again, some people were a little bit doubtful about the credentials of this supposedly enlightened monk. So they went to ask the Buddha, is this monk Pilindhavaccha really enlightened or not? Because he seems to be going around insulting people all the time. And the Buddha confirmed that he was indeed enlightened. But rather like Sariputta, he had certain deeply ingrained aspects of his character because for many lifetimes he had been born either as a king or an emperor. So it's like this everyone's a peasant attitude had sort of was rather deeply ingrained in his character. But the moral of this story is that even when a person has become enlightened, it's still possible for them to have some faults. And if the humble likes of ourselves are still looking for those faults, instead of looking at what we can learn from someone who is already enlightened, then it will not help us to make much progress in the Dhamma practice. So it's better to remain respectful in our attitude, because for the overwhelming majority of people's character, there's goodness to be learned from, which we can try to look for if we are smart. So if you are new to meditation today, I'd just like to say I encourage you to practice further. You might have some idea about what the technique is now to find the center of your body, keep your mind there. If you can manage to meditate a little for maybe 20 minutes a day to start off with, at a time of the day which is convenient for you, then little by little you build up the familiarity with the center of the body, with the meditation, and you'll be able to go further each day in your practice. If you're getting a little bit hazy about how to actually meditate, there is an app for that called MindGem, which you can download for free onto your mobile phone, and it has lots of audio tracks which you can follow along with from teachers in our tradition. There are classes here in person, and most of them are shared online as well via the website of the temple, Facebook and YouTube channels. Tuesday evenings are generally a little bit shorter meditation. Thursday evenings generally a little bit longer, but the monks here in the temple take it in turn to teach on those days. Also, there's an online remnant from the pandemic where between 7 and 8 every Saturday evening it's possible to tune in via those Zoom coordinates and join meditators from all around Europe who do the same, many of whom don't live near enough a branch to be able to actually attend in person. So that might be a good way to meditate from the comfort of your home. Next Tuesday we have a special activity of floating candle rafts, which is a Thai tradition, but we are doing it as part of the full moon celebration on 8th of November in place of the normal Tuesday class, where the theme is floating away your worries. And a little heads up for those who have no particular plans over New Year. is that although it's mainly for Thai people, greeting the New Year from the 30th of December through to the 2nd of January, people come along, sleep over here, meditate, eat lots of Thai food, do lucky dips, do a countdown by chanting, and other interesting activities. But there's quite a lot of teaching going on as well. I know already there's a few people who want to join it who have asked specifically to do it in English. So although it's a little bit more informal than the normal retreats we organize for the weekend retreats, it might be something you want to join all or part of. If you are interested in the details, then please speak to Auntie Krewan, Auntie Ray, and she will make sure you have some accommodation waiting for you. Probably not warm enough to sleep in a tent anymore. Or maybe it is, yes. And last but not least, we are now famous, at least in Woking, courtesy of Woking News and Mail, because the last ceremony we did on the 23rd of October, the Katina ceremony, was given a full page of coverage in the local paper as well. So you might want to look at that and see if you have appeared in it. It seems that most of the Westerners have become angels in pointy hats for this particular issue. Yes. So that's probably all I want to say to you today, but if you have any questions, comments, or feedback at this point, I'd be very pleased to hear from you. It's the same thing again, so the whole year has come round. I'm not sure if we're doing it online or whether it will be purely in person. Yes. If you have a particular wish that it be online, then maybe talk to Auntie Kerwan. Yes. I think the idea now is more to be in person where possible.